Ram Navami is very nice in many ways. And one of the ways is it gives us a really good opportunity to speak about Lord Ramachandra, because many people say, you know, your mantra is half Hare Krishna and half is Hare Rama. So where's the Rama part? Stick around for Ram Navami, that's the Rama part. Of course, Rama in the Hare Krishna mantra can equally mean Lord Ramachandra and equally mean Balarama, because specifically in the Bhagavatam, Balaram is addressed as Rama. Many of you know. In Chaitanya Charitamrita, Prabhupada addresses this question. Some people argue this and that. And Prabhupada's Krishnadas Kaviraj explains and Prabhupada confirms. They're both right. And the difference, a big part of the difference has to do with one's regard or orientation towards the Supreme Lord. Do you see him this way? Do you see him that way? And the Lord is very kind in many ways. And one of them is, according to our regard for him, that's how he reveals himself. He reveals his form and his qualities and his everything according to our regard for him. Confirmed in Bhagavad Gita and confirmed in the Bhagavatam. So this is Hari Rama meaning Lord Ramachandra, at least for this week. And the gold standard for the pastimes of Lord Ram is Valmiki's Ramayana. And one of the commentators of Ramayana, maybe not so well known by devotees in ISKCON, but his name is Govindaraja. Govindaraja lived in Tirupati some 800, 900 years after Yamunacharya and Ramanujacharya. And in between, there were many, many, many commentaries on Ramayana. And he had a dream where the deity of Tirupati appeared in his dream and instructed him to write a commentary on Ramayana. And his commentary on Ramayana is considered most comprehensive. Something like, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami's writing on Chaitanya Charitamrita, the pastimes and teachings of Lord Chaitanya, is most comprehensive. So similarly, he gathered teachings from the previous acharyas, and he writes, I've not created anything, I've just gathered and presented in a very elegant manner. And the history goes back. Many of you know who Ramanujacharya is, the preceptor under whom the teachings of the Sri Sampradaya are held, Ramanujacharya. Ramanujacharya had a guru. Yamunacharya was his guru. And he never personally, physically interacted with him. But there's a nice story of how he understood Yamunacharya's desires. So without going through that story, Yamunacharya, prior to Ramanujacharya, had deep and profound devotion for Lord Ramachandra. And through his deep and profound study of Ramayana, particularly Valmiki Ramayana, he wrote the 18 essential teachings. 18 essential teachings. That's one of the PDFs that you got. We'll touch on it. And he, Yamunacharya, taught to Sri Shailapurna in detail. Sri Shailapurna was the uncle of Ramanujacharya. So Ramanujacharya made a pilgrimage to Tirupati, climbed up the hill, and sat with Sri Shailapurna to hear from him Yamunacharya's teachings on Ramayana, and particularly these 18 essential cardinal teachings, which then Ramanujacharya taught to others and others wrote about, etc. And they were finally in a detailed written form in Govindaraja's commentary. So that, and the essence of those 18 is the Ramayana is a treatise of surrender. Ramayana is a treatise of surrender. It's many things. And that's the outstanding or superlative thing, a treatise of surrender. We'll touch on this shortly. Well, I'll say it. It will come to it again. Bhagavad Gita, we can say many things of what Bhagavad Gita is. But the essence of Bhagavad Gita, the concluding teachings of Bhagavad Gita, is 1866. We all know the verse. Sarvadharmam parityaja mamekam sharanam vraja. And all other verses are subordinate to that verse. As that verse says, all other teachings are subordinate to mamekam sharanam, surrender. Mamekam sharanam, unto Krishna alone. And there's a similar teaching, according to the acharyas that have commented on Ramayana, that holds a similar position. And that's when Vibhishan, we're going to touch on this shortly this morning, Vibhishan surrendered. Vibhishan was Ravana's brother, but he was diametrically opposite of his nature. And after trying to dissuade again and again and again his brother from his diabolical behaviors, he left Ravan and went to take shelter of Lord Ramachandra. And there's a nice section, the Vibhishan surrender section. And there's a bunch of discussion. Ram, as a leader would do, he would ask his associates and his ministers, what is your advice? And then he made his decision. So they said this and that and the other thing. Only Hanuman understood the heart of Ram, because that's where you go, the heart of the Supreme Lord. And then Lord Ramachandra said a celebrated verse, a surrender verse. One who even once declares, from this day forward, I am yours. With full sincerity, from that day, I will give protection from fear and all other circumstances of life. The surrender verse. It's given a name by Sri Vaishnava. So as we hold the Bhagavatam in the highest esteem, Sri Vaishnavas hold Ramayana in a similar, very, very high esteem. And therefore, naturally, amongst Sri Vaishnavas, although Narayana is their worshipable deity, the form of Narayana that they particularly admire, or one of them that they particularly admire, is Lord Ramachandra. Jiva Goswami, in his Bhagavat Sandarbha, and Rupa Goswami, in his Laghu Bhagavatamrita, they both identify the different statuses of Bhagavan. And there's Bhagavan is Bhagavan, Vishnu Tattva is Vishnu Tattva. At the same time, different features of Vishnu Tattva are exhibited more completely or less so. Without going into the detail, it's very detailed. But these three forms of Vishnu, Krishna, Ram, and Nrsimha, there's a Sanskrit term, Pravashta. They manifest the fullness of Bhagavan. The others are Bhagavan. The others are Vishnu Tattva. They just don't manifest the fullness that Ram, Nrsimha, and Krishna manifest. And then the conclusion is Krishna is the source of both and all Vishnu Tattva forms. So that's a little bit of the ontology. And so Ramayana, it's special, gets special attention for Vaishnavas and particularly for Sri Vaishnavas. Let's see if we get this to work. There. Sometimes I hear this doubt. Since the followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu are primarily Krishna Bhaktas, why should we spend our valuable time exploring the topics of Ramayana or give attention to it when the primary is Krishna and etc.? Well, it's in the Bhagavatam, in the 9th canto, the story of Lord Ramachandra, and the story of Ramachandra gets special attention, as does the story of Lord Nrsimhadev gets special attention, several chapters, because they're very special forms of the Lord. Here's a nice verse. O King Parikshit, anyone who orally receives the narrations concerning the characteristics of Lord Ramachandra's pastimes will ultimately be freed from the disease of envy and thus be liberated from the bondage of fruitive activities. Now, the whole of the Bhagavatam it's everything. There's 10 topics, and the forms of the Lord as they appear in the Lord, as they appear in the world, are one. That's one of the 10 topics. So naturally, it's found in the Bhagavatam. And what's in the Bhagavatam is of interest to us because it's in relation to the absolute truth. It brings about, I'll share this. For a number of years, 30, 35 years, something like that, with the encouragement of different devotees, we went together to places of pilgrimage during Kartik month. And it was Vrindavan, Mayapur, Puri, Vrindavan, Mayapur, Puri, Vrindavan, Mayapur, Puri. So devotees said, can we go to some other places? So fast forward, let's go to Ayodhya. And I was not familiar with Ramayana. But the devotees really wanted to go to Ayodhya, so we went to Ayodhya. And then somebody said, can we also go to Chitrakoot? And I didn't even know what Chitrakoot was. You know what Chitrakoot is? place. And they wanted me to come and visit the temple. So I visited the temple, and I'm sharing with you what I shared with them. My absorption in the pastimes of Ram in these places has simply served to increase my appreciation for Krishna and Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavan and out of Vrindavan. It doesn't minimize Ramchandra's pastimes, but Ramchandra's pastimes are a very good foundation for appreciating more deeply what Krishna's pastimes are manifesting. Okay. The slide changer. Hang on, I'm going to have to do something. Slide changing is not working. Let's see if it works now. There we go. Okay. One of the foundation experiences of reading Ramayana is Ram lived by virtue, and its beginning, middle, and end. And when you read Ram's Leela, that subjective value of living by and abiding by virtue, regardless of circumstance, becomes more prominent. Naturally, when society at large becomes accustomed to hearing Ramayana, it increases that tendency within the population. Leave Ramayana out and people are going to want some other literature. And without naming names, there's lots of literature that people hear today, and it doesn't inspire abiding by virtue. Quite the opposite. And life has its challenges. Abide by virtue. Don't depart from virtue. Say it in the positive and say it in the negative. It has a great merit in the culture of a human being to hear Ramayana and become familiar with the pastimes and the mood and the message of Ramayana. Here's that message from Laghu Bhagavatamrita I mentioned. This is the writing of Rupa Goswami, making reference to Padma Purana. In Lord Nrsimha, Ramchandra, and Krishna, the 6 transcendental opulences are perfect and complete. They are the Parabhastas, or the most important forms of the Lord. From him, Krishna, they are manifested as lamps lighted from an original lamp. Now we know this from Brahma Samhita, the verse in Brahma Samhita that the forms of the Lord are like lamps lit from an original lamp. So the same is confirmed in Padma Purana. And he goes on, Lord Krishna is the best of the 3, the Parabhasta forms. Why should this be surprising? The exalted nature of granting liberation to his enemies cannot be seen in any other form of the Lord. Lord Ramachandra engaged in battle with many, the 14,000 Rakshasas in the forest in Janastan, the entire army of Ravana in Lanka destroyed. Did they achieve liberation? No. And those that were killed by Krishna or Krishna's associates, they achieved liberation. So this is the writing of Rupa Goswami commenting on this verse from Padma Purana. There's benefits. Phala means fruit. Palastuti or prayers that describe, or statements that describe the benefits of hearing Ramayana. As you see at the bottom of the sheet, there's a whole page that you should have received. And if you didn't receive it, you can complain to somebody. Okay. If you haven't, you can see Sranga Thakur and he'll help you get a copy. So it's a list from the Bhagavatam and a list from Ramayana of statements of the benefits or the phala of hearing Ramayana. Here's one. A person who completely reads this narration of Raghunath attains the abode of Vishnu at the end of life. Of this, there is no doubt. That's in the final section, final kanda. Now, where does Ramayana come from? What is its origin? Well, we commonly say Valmiki, but where did Valmiki get it from? And according to Madhvacharya, there's a Mula Ramayana. And this Mula means root. The Mula Ramayana is eternal. Now, Lord Ramachandra comes, like Krishna, he comes once in a day of Brahma. But the pastimes of Lord Ramachandra and the Ramayana depicting the pastimes is eternal. It's important. Just as the Vedas are eternal, Ramayana is eternal. And that original Ramayana consists of 1 billion verses. That's a big Ramayana. Looks like a pretty skinny book he's handing to him. But 1 billion verses given by Lord Hayagriva. Hayagriva is the form of the Lord that has a horse head, and he gave it to Brahma. And Brahma in turn passed the 1 billion verses on to Narada. And Narada in turn passed in essence to Valmiki, 74 verses, right in Valmiki Ramayana. And then Valmiki composed 24,000 Sanskrit verses. And that's the origin of Ramayana in this world. Now, is it possible for others to have an understanding of Ramayana that doesn't come in this way? And that's another topic we'll touch on shortly. Within the text of Valmiki Ramayana, in the first section, Bala Kanda, Valmiki indicated that he intended it to also be called Sita Charita, sublime pastimes of Sita, and Paulasya Vadha, the killing of Ravana. And it has to do with Ravana's father's father is Palasya Muni. And it's described in the Ramayana and so forth. So it's about Ramachandra, but it's also about Sita and the protection that goes to those who take shelter of Krishna, take shelter of Ram, and he gives protection to them. Paulasya Vadha. A nice illustration of Madhvacharya. And Madhvacharya wrote in his Vedanta Sutra or Brahma Sutra commentary, the third verse. The third sutra is Shastra Yonit Vat. And this is his commentary, or from his commentary. He lists the eternal Vedas, the Shastra. Rig Veda, Yajurveda, Samaveda, Tarvaveda, Mahabharata, Pancharatra, and the original Mula Ramayana are all Vedic literatures. Any literature following the conclusive statements of these Vedic literatures is also considered to be Vedic literature. That literature which does not conform to Vedic literature is simply misleading. So it's part of the original Veda in the form of Mula Ramayana, at 1 billion verses. Right. In Govindaraja's commentary, he describes something similar to what we know about the Bhagavatam. We know about the Bhagavatam is the form of Krishna in the literary feature, the 12 cantos representing the different parts of the body of Krishna. So Govindaraj says the same. And it's poetic, but the Balakanda is a commentary, Valmiki's commentary on the jeweled anklets, Mani, Manjira. And then you go up his form, his yellow cloth, his jeweled belt, his pearl necklace, his elegant tilak, his gem-studded crown, and the jeweled top piece for the crown on his head. That's the 7 sections of Ramayana with Sanskrit terms for each. Naturally, commentators meditate deeply, and naturally, commentators are quite often poetic. They express something that's very beautiful in poetic language, quite natural. And that's what Govindaraj does. Now, there's 7 khandas, or 7 cantos, the way that it's described in Padma Purana about Srimad Bhagavatam. It gives 2 plus 2 plus 2, so a series of 6 twos, which makes 12 cantos, which is quite okay. It's the idea here is the Ramayana is the form of Lord Ram in literary feature. That's the understanding. Now comes something that's a little complicated. And the complicated is there are different versions of Ramayana. And as you see at the bottom of the screen there's a PDF that you should have received that has the names of some of those authorized Ramayanas. And I'll go it simple because of time and circumstance. But in Chaitanya Charitamrita, in Prabhupada's purports, he makes reference to some of these Ramayanas by name. So while Valmiki Ramayana is the gold standard, everyone accepts it's the gold standard. I don't know of anyone that doesn't accept that. There are other Ramayanas, and they're also authorized. In those other Ramayanas, there are details that are not exactly Valmiki Ramayana details. I'll give 2 examples. In Valmiki Ramayana, there's no teaching, there's no statement that Ram worshipped Lord Shiva. There are different versions of circumstances where Ram worshipped Lord Shiva, and what are we to understand from that? We're Vaishnavas that accept that Ram worshipped Lord Shiva. He was honoring his own devotee. Shri Shri Radha Nila Madhava Ki Jai. It's not in Valmiki Ramayana. There's no mention. Yet, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when he made his travels in South India, he visited the place where there's a Shiva Linga, Rameshwara, where Ram worshiped Lord Shiva. So he was accepting that it's authorized, although it's not in Valmiki Ramayana. And there's details, without covering the details because of time. They're different. There's a version where before he wanted to cross the ocean and he worshiped Lord Shiva. There's when he came back after killing Ravana, and after killing Ravana, he was feeling, I've killed the Brahmana, because Ravana was the son of a Brahmana. So he wanted to purify himself for having killed the Brahmana, although it was battle, and it was a perfectly Vedic purpose for killing when it was kidnapped one's wife. By dharma, that person is to be killed, thus relieved from the sin of that sin, the reaction of that sin. So he worshipped. And there's some details of how that worship occurred. So there's a discrepancy or a difference. And supposing you're like me, that you really don't know so much about Ramayana, and then you come across there's these differences. You know, it's puzzling. Now, one answer of how these differences exist in authorized Ramayanas is really simple, a piece of cake. There are different days of Brahma, and during different days of Brahma, Lord Ramachandra performs different activities. Sometimes, and sometimes something different, sometimes something different. In that PDF that you have, there's a statement from Padma Purana, there's 100 authorized Ramayanas, and that's 5,000 years ago. And subsequently, there have been Ramayanas written. And some of you are from India, and you know one of those that's very popular. There's two of them that are very popular, written, since Padma Purana was compiled. And that's Ramcharitamanas by Tulsi. And there's a lot of people in India that's their Ramayana, is Tulsi Ramayana. And it has things in his writing that are not in Valmiki Ramayana. Here's one of those. When Sita heard Maricha making this loud cry, Lakshman, Sita, help. Maricha was making a voice that sounded like Ram's voice. And so Sita said, Lakshman, go rescue Ram. And there was a, disagreement. Ram doesn't need to be, he's not in danger. That's a trick. And Sita then became very angry and insulted him in different ways, saying, you just all along, you just wanted to enjoy me. Forget it. I'll give up my life before you can enjoy me. Go protect Ram. I'll take your life my life if you don't, etc., etc. So finally, much against his better judgment and much against the instruction of Ram, don't leave Sita's side. He left. But before he left, with his bow, he made a circle around their ashram called Lakshman Rekha with his bow, and told her, don't step outside of this. If you stay inside, you're safe. If you step outside, anything can happen. And she stepped outside when Ravan, with his trickery, tried to lure her to step outside so he could kidnap her. That's not in Valmiki Ramayana. It's very popular. You can find images on the internet of, Lakshman Rekha. He's making this circle. And even when you don't show him making the circle, there's Sita, there's the circle, there's Ravana, enticing her to come on the other side of that circle. It's not in Valmiki Ramayana. And some devotees I know have gone to the trouble of identifying the discrepancies or the differences between this Ramayana, that Ramayana, and Valmiki Ramayana. It's a long list. There's some major ones and there's some minor ones, details. So if you're like me, it's like, that's puzzling. What do I do? There's different versions. And there's several things you can do. One, you can just say, look, Valmiki Ramayana, that's the gold standard, that's it. I'm dug in. And anything else, I don't pay attention to because it's gold standard Valmiki Ramayana. Then there's another position, a little more relaxed, that says there are different days of Brahma and there are different versions of Ramayana. And some people really love that version of Ramayana that they grew up with, and that's just fine. And I like Valmiki Ramayana, but I honor that other persons like other authorized versions. And how do we know what's an authorized version? Our acharyas have helped us. And that list that I've given you, those are ones that I found. They're accepted by our acharyas. They make reference to them. And several of them are referenced right in Chaitanya Charitamrita. Here it is. Puranas state there are 100 versions of Ramayana, and the variations are due to kalpa beta, means different days of Brahma. What's the relation between Krishna and Lord Ramachandra? There's a very nice reference in Padyavali. What's Padyavali? Padyavali is a compilation of verses from scripture, which Rupa Goswami compiled, like his verse book, you could say, favorite verses, Padyavali. And here's one from that collection. Yashoda narrated to Krishna, there was once a king named Rama. Yes. His wife was Sita. Yes. On the order of his father, Rama lived in the Panchavati forest. There, Ravana kidnapped Sita. As Lord Krishna heard his mother narrate his own activities performed in ancient times, he suddenly called out, Lakshmana, where is my bow? Where is my bow? Where is my bow? I pray that these alarmed words of Lord Krishna may protect you all. And in some cases, Rupa Goswami was the author of these verses. Some cases, someone else. In some cases, it's author unknown, but he liked. Sanatana Goswami makes reference to a verse from Gopal Tapani Upanishad, where in Gopal Tapani Upanishad, there's a sloka that reads, Yo sao saurye tishtati. That's the verse. And Sanatana Goswami has given the following meaning. Lord Krishna is the same Supreme Personality of Godhead who formerly appeared in the Surya Vangsha, Saurye. He formerly appeared in the Surya Vangsha. Just like in the 9th canto Bhagavatam, the story of Ramchandra is told in the lineage of kings from the sun god. And then after that comes the lineage of kings from the moon god, Surya Vangsha and Chandra Vangsha. And when it comes to the Chandra Vangsha, then it goes off and they tell the story of Krishna. So Ram appeared in the Sun dynasty or Surya Vangsha or Saurye. Lord Krishna is that same Supreme Personality Godhead as Lord Ramachandra. Sanatana Goswami's commentary. Oh, Krishna. Technology is great when it cooperates, and sometimes it doesn't. There we go. Yeah. There's, within the Vedic literature, there's the four Vedas, there's the Upanishads, and there's the Smriti section of the Vedas. And the Smriti section means it illuminates the Shruti section. And that Shruti section, the Smriti section, commonly has these two divisions, Puranas and Itihasas, both means histories. Histories illuminate the teachings, because within the histories, there's teachings. And it just gives in a story form or history form. So the two categories of the histories are Puranas and Itihasas. Mahabharata is an Itihasa, Ramayana is an Itihasa, and then the Bhagavatam is a Purana, and the other Puranas. So the Puranas and Itihasas. And there's two main differences between them. One of the main differences between them is the Itihasas follow chronologically. We discussed this yesterday evening. Chronologically, boom, 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 boom. Oh, you go this way. One thing after the next thing, chronologically, and it's in chronological order. And the Puranas are not. Second difference is chronology is one, and the topics in Itihasa, commonly it follows one dynasty, like the Pandavas or the Kuru dynasty, and describes their histories. And it's not all over the place. There's some other things that are mentioned, but the focus stays on the Pandavas. Or in Ramayana, the focus stays on Lord Ramachandra throughout. There's other histories that are presented, but the focus keeps coming back to Lord Ramachandra. And Puranas are not like that. They have their 5 topics or 10 topics, and it's covering those topics. And it's not so focused like a Itihasa is. And the method of propagating the Itihasas commonly was by singing them. Just like when Valmiki composed Ramayana, after the composition, he had the task of how to propagate it. And he came up with the 2 sons of Ram, Lava and Kush. So he taught them the music. He taught them the method of recitation. And they went on tour singing Ramayana, including in Ayodhya. And Ram heard the whole Ramayana from his 2 sons. There's many, many poetic images. Poetic images doesn't mean it's fiction. It just means that the language is poetic, a little flowery, a little, image creating, emotion stirring kind of language, poetic images. And those poetic images in the whole story, we saw this line already. It inspires living by virtue in the reader. And that's one of the intentions. That's one of the effects. I mentioned this already. This is Ramayana is a treatise of surrender. There's 18 cardinal lessons. And that's the 3rd PDF that you should have received. In case you're interested, you can go through them. We're almost done. There's other places where the Sri Vaishnava Acharyas in particular take the whole of the Ramayana and break it down again on this principle of surrender, or taking shelter. The sages, after Ram left Ayodhya, he was banished for 14 years. He went to the forest, and his main activity for the first 12 and a half years was visiting hermitages of sages, because they were his devotees. And as devotees, they wanted to see the Lord. So he came because they wanted to see their Lord. He gave them his association and his shelter. And in the commentary of the Sri Vaishnava Acharyas, in that section where Ram is visiting the sages, it gives 6 characteristics that are shelter-giving characteristics. I'm not going to elaborate because of time. Look at the time, it's already 8:30. Swami Tvam. Tvam means having that quality of being a master. Vatsalyam, he was affectionate. Saushilyam, again, there's lots of commentary expanding on these characteristics of Ram. He has good character. And he's very kind. He would mix with anybody, irrespective of their past. The consideration was they were willing to take shelter of him. Easily approachable, Saubalyam, and Jnanam, he had knowledge, and he had ability to accomplish everything and anything. So these are embedded in Ramayana, giving lessons about surrender and taking shelter, specific to the sages. And they remark, when they speak to him, they greet him, they have exchanges with him, they mention these points in their own way, and then the acharyas have extracted them in this nice systematic manner. Vibhishan, in his taking shelter of Ram, when he was insulted and threatened by Ravana for speaking the truth, he left. He had a mystic power. He could just levitate. He rose out of the assembly, and along with him were the 4 ministers that were his constant companions. And they went all the way across the ocean to where Lord Ramachandra was. And the way Valmiki Ramayana described, he continued to hover in the air. He didn't come in for a landing. He appealed to Ramchandra, actually appealed to Sugriva, to let Ramchandra know that I'd like to take his shelter. Please ask him if he'll accept me. The Sri Vaishnava Acharyas describe, you see in the painting, there's 4 men behind Vibhishan. And those 4 men represent 2 characteristics of one who's taking shelter and 2 characteristics of one who is worthy of taking shelter. It's nice. So Sharanagata, that's the one who wants to take shelter, is akinchanatvam. We're familiar with this word akinchana from Kunti's prayers. Akinchana gochara, akinchana, having no other shelter. Akinchana, I possess nothing which I view as my shelter. And ananya gati tvam. Not only I don't have any other shelter, since I have no other place to go, I fully repose my shelter in the one who is worthy. It's, positive and negative. And then the one who's being taken shelter of, the Sharanya, that's Lord Ramachandra, 2 characteristics. Saralata. Saralata is simplicity. Simplicity, it's a nice topic. According to Bhaktisiddhanta, simplicity is the primary characteristic of a Brahmana. Simplicity, as opposed to duplicity. Their simplicity on the part of Ram means, regardless of where their background is, where they've come from, what even species of life they're in, if they take shelter of him, he's very accepting. And Shakti, he can afford to give shelter to anyone because he's very powerful. He's supremely powerful. So that's the character. That's some of the lessons from Ramayana. And, circling back to the opening topic here, Ramayana is a treatise of surrender. I tried to develop that topic a little bit this morning with some embellishments. Radha Madhava ki jai. Now, my understanding is that Monday through Friday, we have a really strict cutoff time. And on Saturday and Sunday, there's a little more freedom. So if there's some discussion, I'm open for some discussion. Sarva.
I don't know much about Ramayana, but the Ramcharitmanas by Tulsidas, is that on the list of bona fide?
Can somebody help me? Yes. Yes.
I seem to have read somewhere where Prabhupada mentioned something about it. It was.
Oh, okay. The explanation of those who are lovers of Ramcharitamanas goes like this. There are, as a strategy, Sridhar Swami included some sections in his authorized bona fide commentary of Bhagavatam that seemed to lend itself to impersonalism. And it's even more direct. I've heard this from learned devotees. Similarly, Tulsidasa's Ramcharitamanas has some passages that lend itself to that. But the predominance of his life and his writings is entirely devotional. Now, Prabhupada, the reference that I grew up with was Prabhupada didn't recommend that we read Tulsi Ramayana or Ramcharitamanas for that reason. There are some places that are not, one can read them as if impersonal. So he recommended we didn't read it. On the other hand, there are stalwart Vaishnavas. Radha Govinda Maharaj is one who, where he grew up, that's what he grew up with. And he has great love for the personality of Godhead and has an understanding of Ramcharitamanas that's entirely devotional. There are sections in Shukadeva Goswami's Srimad Bhagavatam that one could read as impersonal. There are delicate passages that one could read that way. At the same time, Tulsidas was totally devoted to Lord Ramachandra. There's examples, but I don't need to go into the examples. So I don't read it, but your question is not, do I read it? Your question is it bona fide? It's bona fide. It's something that may not be good for some persons, that when they read something that seems to indicate impersonal slant, that they will become bewildered. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I I read a little bit of Ramcharitmanas before I became a devotee, and I was struck with the devotional qualities and the poetic. So, that's when I heard that it might have some impersonalism, I didn't understand.
There are places in Prabhupada's writings where he honors Tulsi Das as a great devotee. At the same time, he said what he said. And there are passages, they're sprinkled here and there, they're not many. Okay. Up front over here. Oh, you have one. Okay.
Krishna Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
So there was a passage or a quote from, I think, Jiva Goswami, that Krishna is the only giver of liberation.
That's right.
I was wondering about Kalki Avatar. My understanding was he liberates all the souls at the end of Kali Yuga.
Well, what does it mean? Liberation can mean different things. That my understanding of what Kalki did was he relieved the sinful souls at the end of the age of Kali from the reactions of their sins. To neutralize their reactions to sins happened also to Ravana and Hiranyakashipu being killed by the Lord. They were just because that's another question. Wait a minute. Didn't Lord Nrsingadev tell Prahlad, your father has already been liberated? So what is that liberation? His sins were neutralized. The reactions to his sins were neutralized. Now, where did he go? He didn't enter the Brahmajyoti. I mean, I had discussions with Bhanu Swami because he, translates a lot. His answer is there's no commentary anywhere that says where he went, because he came back again, then he came back again. So where did he go in between? One of the acharyas mentions there's a heavenly realm called Vira Swarga. Swarga means heaven. Vira means strength. So those kshatriyas who are killed in battle that go to heaven go to Vira Swarga. No, there's no elaboration. Just one commentary says they went to Vira Swarga. Not liberation. The reactions of sins were neutralized, that kind of liberation. But they didn't enter Brahmajyoti and they didn't go to Vaikuntha. Okay. Yeah.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. We hear that the Mahabharata, we don't have a full version of the Mahabharata. There's several different versions. I've heard that we don't have the complete version of any Mahabharata. Is that correct? And I guess my question is, do we have the full version of Valmiki Ramayana?
Yeah. 24,000. Take the Srimad Bhagavatam. We say 18,000. There are devotees that have counted them, and it's not 18,000. But it's 18,000. And when you read, I've read commentaries where particularly Sanatana Goswami and Jiva Goswami will say there are other versions of the Bhagavatam and certain words change in other versions of the Bhagavatam, and they acknowledge it. But there's a standard version that our acharyas accept. This is it, and there's another version. That's not major. It's very, very minor, and the word meanings can actually connect to what the version that we accept. But your question was, is it true? Yes, it's true about Mahabharata. It hasn't been preserved as the Bhagavatam has been preserved. And Is the original Valmiki Ramayana intact? Yes. 24,000. A little louder.
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
That's
Thank you for the nice class, Maharaj. Maharaj, basically we have so many different versions of the pastimes and the history, and so we are seeing, which is authentic and things like. One of the things when I
and
do
some
the
are not,
Achaman,
and some are not.
some are not. Yes.
There's a lot. I'm interrupting, but allow me to interrupt.
Yes, Maharaj.
Shukadeva Goswami says, when he's narrating to Maharaj Parikshit, even at his time, there's multiple versions. And I'm only going to speak from the authorized ones.
Yes, Maharaj. So every day in the morning when I do the Achaman, I read this verse, Tad Vishno Param Padam Sada Pasyanti Suraya Diva Chakshur Atatam Tad Viprasho Vipanyo Jagraham Jagravahasam Samindate Vishnor Yat Param Padam. Just as those with the ordinary vision see the sun's rays in the sky, so the wise and the learned devotees always see the supreme abode of the Lord Vishnu. Because those highly praiseworthy and spiritually awake Brahmanas can see that abode, they can also reveal it to others. So all the knowledge that we are getting is not based on what we see, but based on somebody who is realized. So the scriptures that are given to us, we can say they are authentic based on who's giving it, right?
Based on?
Who's delivering it or giving it to us?
Based on, then you speak it slower and clearer, because when you do something critical, don't say it real fast.
Oh, sorry, Maharaj. So based on who is delivering it?
Who is the
Vaishnavas or who is delivering it?
Who is presenting it?
Yes.
Okay.
So
when you get enthusiastic, the microphone goes over here too. Okay. So you want to know, is that the correct understanding? That's your question?
That should be the measure, right, Maharaj? Like, to see whether it is authentic or not.
Then there's measures of that measure. Like disciplic succession, for example. The checks and balances. Disciplic succession is, so where is that person in disciplic succession? Here's a for example that's close to home. Some of the six Goswamis wrote, I say some because some didn't, Raghunath Bhatta didn't, but they wrote things that we don't find in Srimad Bhagavatam or the Puranas. Yet we accept them. And what's the basis of our accepting them? Then it's the combination of what you said and what I'm saying. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, on more than one occasion, confirmed that Rupa Goswami has understood everything that I have taught him in full, and empowered him to expand on what I have taught him. So disciplic succession plus the qualification of Rupa Goswami. He wasn't authorized to go on a creative writing spree. He was authorized to expand the teachings. So he gave teachings about pastimes. I mean, Vidagdha Madhava and Lalita Madhava. Whoa. You familiar? A little bit? It's very esoteric, to say the least. So we accept. So yes to a qualified yes to your answer, or your question, or your premise. And here's another one, that the other great acharyas, they accept those conclusions. There's corroboration. How's that? You satisfied? Kind of. Okay. Yes. Uttam Bhakta. Uttam Bhakta. Uttam Bhakta.
Thank you, Guru Maharaj. So, is it fair to say virtue is linear and non-linear? The reason I say that in Lord Ram's virtue, everybody can see it, an ordinary person can see it. But in Lord Krishna's pastimes, not everyone can see that virtue.
But that doesn't mean non-linear. I mean, and without using the language, the answer is yes.
Okay. And the other question I have is, when Lord Ram killed those soldiers, 14,000 earlier, and then later on, they didn't get liberation. So my understanding is that they ended up in the same place which you mentioned earlier, answering Prabhu's question.
It's not discussed so much. I've searched. And the reference that I mentioned is one, and it's not elaborated upon, but it makes sense that, you know, those who are killed in battle, Kshatriyas that are engaged in Kshatriya duty, it's not, you know, like, you know, the modern wars that go on, that's not Kshatriyas engaging in Kshatriya duty, but there's a destination. And it makes sense. But, you know, you're asking, can it be expanded to the 14,000 and all the other fellows that were out there in Lanka? And by logic, yes. I don't have any confirmation. By logic, yes, it would extend.
Okay. Thank you, Maharaj.
Something else? Somebody else had their hand up? No. Oh, yes. Oh.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you very much for a very brilliant presentation. And it described that, or I heard, I haven't read Ramayana, that end of the Lord Ramchandra's pastime, he took all the Ayodhyavasi back to spiritual Ayodhya planet. Can you comment on that? Is that a liberation?
Is that correct? Is that, you're asking, is that a correct statement?
Yes, is that a correct statement? And if it is correct, then is it considered liberation?
Oh. Well, it's not correct. And there's mention in Ramayana that in addition to Hanuman remaining behind, there are some others, a scattered number that remain behind. Their names are given. And I don't remember the names, they're the ones that were given, but some remained behind. And the main question is, those that did go with him, does that constitute liberation? That's your question. Well, these are eternal associates. They're eternal associates that appeared with him. And so they returned to the place that they came from. And in that sense, you can say liberation, but it's just returning where they came from. Commonly, liberation refers to a conditioned soul that becomes freed from their conditioning, whether it's pious or sinful. They become free from their conditioning, and they enter into a totally pure state from the conditioned state. And that's not the case of his associates. So liberation in the sense that they returned, but not liberation in the sense that they were conditioned souls that became freed from conditioning. Very thoughtful question. Thank you. There's something online. And we're going to end with this.
This is from Padma Manjari Mataji. Thank you for your class, Guru Maharaj. Since there are many Ramayanas out there, I'm confused. Can you please recommend one that I can buy?
Oh, Valmiki Ramayana. Piece of cake.
There's one more from
Okay.
Amar Mataji. Hare Krishna Maharaj, you kindly mentioned Ramayana uproots envy. Can you please
Ramayana to what?
uproots envy?
Uproots envy.
Can you please elaborate more on this? Thank
Well,
you.
envy means being averse to the Supreme. Envy in this world has a root, envy of the Supreme. And when envy towards the Supreme is uprooted, then envy is uprooted. And it awakens a loving attraction for the Supreme, which uproots envy towards the Supreme, which uproots envy. So it's how we regard the personality of Godhead. And it has that power, potency, to make us, to bring us to the point of again attracted without envy towards the Supreme. Okay, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.